I'm Garrett Wishon from Sam Houston Electric in Livingston, Texas. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for Along Those Lines comes from Power Intel. Whether maintaining fiber networks or exploring deployment, Power Intel has the products and services NRECA members need. Let Power Intel's value-added services simplify your network deployments. Visit them at Tech Advantage 2024, booth 1013.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. According to a recent study from the Center for Energy Workforce Development, the power utility industry is in the midst of a, quote, skills and people shortage brought on by a steady stream of senior leaders reaching retirement age, an evolution in the industry toward more advanced technologies that's making it more difficult to find qualified employees, and a market increase across the sector in non-retirement turnover. Many electric cooperatives have the additional challenge of having to attract new employees to rural and sometimes remote locations. It's a trend that's driving a critical question. Who will become the CEOs and senior managers that lead America's electric cooperatives into the future? As always, cooperatives are responding with unique, creative initiatives on succession planning and employee development that leverage the qualities that make co-ops nimble, proactive, and resilient. To talk about these efforts, we'll hear from Delaine Orendorff, NRECA's Director of Human Capital Planning and Compensation, and Clay Fitch, CEO of Wells Rural Electric in Nevada, where they've implemented an ingenious way of identifying and preparing future leaders. Delaine, Clay, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thanks.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, Delaine, why don't you set the stage for us? What are some of the broader succession planning challenges that businesses in the U.S. are facing right now, and what's causing it?
So I think there's a number of challenges and also opportunities. The main challenge that I see is how do we develop employees so that they can confidently take on a new role in the time frame that works for our organization. Whether the role is a management position or a different individual contributor position, what we know as a result of examining our co-op data is that there have been and will continue to be significant retirements at the leadership level. When we look at the 2023 CEO, GM, and COO data, for example, there will be over 42% of our top leaders in these categories that are eligible to retire within the next 5 years. And this trend can also be seen in many other industries. There's also that need to develop employee skills to meet the technological and regulatory challenges of the future. Succession planning is all about making sure that you have the right people with the right skills at the right time in order for your cooperative to achieve its strategic goals and be successful. Now, this does create some great opportunities for those who are entering the workforce, because as organizations begin to focus on the growth and development of talent that will move into these leadership positions and other critical positions, that provides a lot of opportunity for entry-level employees.
Clay, following on to what Delaine was just talking about, what sort of specific things are you seeing in your region that have led you to change the way you do succession planning?
In our region, we're BPA customers, and they have about 145 different utilities. And one thing that we do in the Northwest is we meet. We have a lot of meetings. And I would have to say it's been starkly different over the last 5 years. You can't go to a meeting that somebody isn't retiring. I mean, if not one, 2 or 3 people are retiring, or their key people are retiring. And one of the observations I did see is a lot of times they were more prepared than what I think we were. There was somebody that was kind of an internal candidate, or they've gone through a process. So we got a real message about 4 or 5 years ago was we really need to see if we can find more talent. And so we should advertise or try to find a director of operations and engineering. So we contracted with NRECA. They did a national search for us, did an excellent job for us. We were able to do all the interview on the candidates, got all through it, and we couldn't land one. We ended up with a dry hole. And that was us putting out our best effort to try to be able to attract that. So we started looking at, if we're going to have some succession planning, we had 3 ways to go. We could buy somebody, we could rent somebody, or we could develop somebody. And so we started thinking, we better come up with a succession plan that is really focused on developing, basically renting good quality consultants to come work with us, and develop talent that's inside to be able to move up through the organization. So that was kind of a real impact on us.
Now, as you went through that process where you made an offer to somebody and nobody was there to bite, what were the reasons they gave? What made it hard to fill that particular job?
I think that in our particular case, there are rural cooperatives and then there's kind of remote cooperatives, and we are a remote area. And it isn't like that we don't have a great place to be, but it is a lifestyle change. When you're 3 hours from a major metropolitan area, that creates a set of challenges. And a lot of times you're also hoping that if you're going to come, there's an opportunity not for you, but there's also an opportunity for your spouse. Even though we have some great jobs, it's a different quality of life.
Maybe we can take 2 seconds for you to talk about your territory and your membership, about who you serve and where.
Sure. We are headquartered in Wells, Nevada, which is in northeastern Nevada. We only have 6,000 accounts, so we're a very small co-op. We serve most of northeastern Nevada, and then we serve out into what we call the northwestern desert of Utah that we're out there, which is you'd call the Salt Flats. We are a cooperative that is really mostly industrial and commercial. About 85% of our load is commercial, and then the remaining accounts are scattered around. We say 11,000 square miles. We only have 1,000 miles of line, so we have less than 2 customers per mile. We're out in an area where to the east is Salt Lake City, which is 180 miles away. North would be Twin Falls, Idaho, which is about 2 hours away. And then if anybody says, you must be near Vegas, yeah, it's 400 miles away. Nevada's a big state, so it's over 400 miles. It's a high desert, so you got to get used to that too. We get plenty of snow. We get plenty of heat. We're very happy with it, but it's a lot easier if you go up in the area. You're a lot more accustomed to it.
So, Delaine, talk about how co-ops are vulnerable to some of these challenges associated with bringing people up from the beginning.
Well, that's the whole thing about succession planning, is developing people to make the next level. As Clay was talking, what I was thinking actually was, as you're developing people and moving them up, that gives an opportunity for entry-level positions, which is where co-ops like Clay's are going to be much more successful. Just because of supply and demand, there's a greater supply of those entry-level folks. And then as you develop them, as they grow, and we know that's important to employees, especially the generation that's entering the workforce now, that's how you're going to find your leaders. And Clay is doing a really great job in developing that next tier down from the CEO and also the tier down from that. But first, you have to look at each job in a way that identifies the skills and competencies so that you can appropriately develop the person who's going to step into that role. So it could be on-the-job training, special projects, a combination, and then customizing it to the individual, because not all of your next tier down are going to be at the same place. Some might be strong in finance, some might be strong in operations. So how do you give them those complementary opportunities, stretch projects, collaborations that are going to help them get to that next level?
That's great. So, Clay, I'd love to hear a real thorough description of what it was you did, because you sort of started with nothing and built a development program that really identifies folks in your co-op across the board who are ready for leadership or who may be ready for leadership at some point. Talk about what you did in terms of figuring out how you're going to do this program.
We did a culture assessment just after COVID came out, and just kind of see what the culture was really looking at. And needless to say, we were pretty surprised that we weren't exactly the great culture that we thought we were. We definitely had our challenges, but that was a good thing. At least the employees were very honest. What it came down to is didn't really know how I fit in. I really want to work for the cooperative. I'd like to be here for the cooperative, and those type of things. And so it was a real eye-opener for us. And along with that, where we're saying how difficult it might be to be able to bring in additional talent, you started looking at saying, what could we do in order to really make a succession plan real? And so I didn't have a real guide. I just kind of sat down and tried to figure out what is it something that I could do. And I came up with what I call the interim CEO plan that we have here at Wells Electric. And I wish I would have started earlier. If there's anything I could do, I wish I would have started earlier and maybe tied it to a couple of other things. But what it got down to was with my senior staff, each one of them took a turn as the COO for a 3-month term. And basically, they took over all of the day-to-day operations of the organization. So that sounds simple to say, but I'm going to say the biggest impact is on the CEO. Because you're not just delegating, you're saying, no, you get to make decisions. And you have to prepare yourself as a CEO that you're going to support those decisions and go talk with them. Otherwise, the whole experience doesn't matter. And when I was looking at here is, I got some great people, but a lot of times they're very focused on just their department. And so they aren't sitting here thinking about how do you make decisions across the entire organization and what does it take to get your people to follow you along or do those things in terms of leadership. So I wish I would have written it up into this big solid program that was all out there with all these requirements and all those things. But it was very successful, in my opinion. It also led to create a leadership group that's right below the department heads. And the same experiences over there as to say, how are you going to put those people into leadership roles? And you have to relinquish your control and to be able to let people make decisions. I don't think it's like freewheeling or giving everything away. What it is, it's been a clear demonstration to employees to allow them to own their jobs, allow them to actually be a part of what the organization doing, making a difference on where it's going. And really that was all driven out of what we could see inside of the assessment we got at first, is that we had a lot of great people that would like to do something, and maybe we just weren't structured right in order to do that. Also, if you don't have good job descriptions, and you don't have good paths in your job descriptions, it's very difficult to be able to let employees know, if this is my path, what's it going to take? Because you're expecting them to do it before they get the job.
Clay, did you see yourself as this sort of progressive CEO who was going to do all these cutting edge things, or was it just sort of a function of necessity?
I think it was much more of a function of necessity there. I had a sincere loyalty to Wellsboro Electric. I've been there for a long time. Absolutely want to see Wellsboro Electric be a success after I'm forgotten. And so the only way to do that is try to do the best I could at the time I had, in order to put everybody into the best position they could possibly be. And so I think I had some really solid folks that would probably be really good leaders, but they didn't necessarily have confidence in their ability because they didn't have the experience to it. Because some of the employees I have, it's the only job they've ever had.
Delaine, maybe you can talk a little bit about, from your side, when you were working with Clay on this project, talk a little bit about what you were hearing from him, some of the advice that you gave him, some of the things that you told him that would be useful across the program.
When we were working on the succession planning, as I mentioned, we looked intently at Clay's job, his job description, broke it down into the parts, and tried to put together a plan for each person on how they could achieve. For example, if they needed to learn more about power supply, taking them to the power supply meetings. I think the 3-month COO project was just icing on the cake in terms of actually pushing them into the experience. So they did have to make the decisions, because oftentimes it is difficult when you've been a doer your whole career and then you move into management and then you're expected to run the whole shop. That can be really challenging. We actually also did the career path that Clay was talking about, so that each employee every year, and we tied it into the performance appraisal so it wouldn't get skipped, so that it comes up year after year. And I had one of the managers contact me and he said, Delaine, that was so great that we tied that in.
Let's pause here for a word from our sponsor, and when we come back, we'll talk about the importance of tailoring a succession plan to suit each co-op's culture.
NRECA's Along Those Lines podcast is proudly supported by Power and Tel. Since 1963, Power and Tel has been serving the telecommunications industry. Their extensive distribution system provides electric co-ops and contractors with a cost-effective and reliable way to get the range of products needed to build and maintain communications networks. As a WBENC certified women-owned business and value-added partner, they offer efficient solutions for solving supply chain challenges and go the extra mile to get you the right product at the right place and time.
I'm Autumn McMahon from Oklahoma Electric Cooperative in Norman, Oklahoma. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Delaine, I know you do this with a lot of co-ops. Do you make it tailored deliberately and directly toward each co-op based on their membership, based on their territory? How into the weeds do you get with co-ops that you talk to about this?
Well, I would say each succession plan is customized to the co-op, not so much in terms of the region, only the size in terms of how it influences the jobs, because oftentimes what we see in small co-ops is someone wears many hats. So that job that we're developing the next level down for, the successors for, may need a broader skill set than, say, a larger co-op where, the CFO focuses on being a CFO and doesn't also have to do safety maybe or HR under them or whatever. So I would say it's more focused on customizing it for what that co-op needs. Similarly, when we look at the CEO position, we look at what are the top 5 competencies the board wants in that position. And then we develop some individual developmental plans for the next tier of folks based on that. So each one is customized just because of the varying nature of the co-ops and the varying nature of what their needs are. Certainly, some of the developmental plans, one of the activities could be working with the statewide association in that particular area. It could be going to the local community college. So we would look at the opportunities in that area for the employees to gain additional skill sets as well.
Clay, do you have things like that in your territory? Do you have like a local university that you can reach out to? Do you have resources that are beyond just putting an advertisement in the newspaper?
Yeah. Well, we do have a small little junior college that's next to us over there in Elko, and so that is a resource that's available to us. We're also unique. We don't really serve in 3 states, but since we're a BPA customer, we're in 3 states, and so we belong to 3 different statewide associations. So that allowed me to start sending one of my department heads saying, no, you're going to sit as the director on the Utah statewide. No, you're the director over at ICUA. And what I did is I made sure that they had to give the board a report. See, so that what are your activities and not just what did you hear? It's really saying you got to get used to saying that's what someone's saying, but how does it apply to us? You got to start thinking about how does that apply to us? What decisions are we going to make? And so it really puts a challenge on them, but it wasn't me, spoon feeding them. They're out there trying to learn. And what it did is it started creating their own network that is starting to be lots bigger.
The other thing that I really liked about Clay's interim CEO program was that he had them all giving each other evaluations after they finished their terms so that they could even grow and develop further. This is feedback from their peers, not official 360, but peer evaluation on how they could be better. And for everything that I've heard, they were fairly honest. Yeah.
So succession planning is unique to each co-op, and so are the opportunities to do it. Delaine, talk about how important it is to be nimble and take a real good look at what your opportunities are and mine and leverage those as much as possible.
I think that's what's key to developmental opportunities. What we know about adult learning is that 70% of it should be experiential, stretch projects, organization-wide action learning teams. 20% should be learning off of others. And then 10% is more formal education. So that's a generic percentage. You wouldn't necessarily need to follow all that. But as we're coming up with the development plans, that's what we try to tap into, working with the leaders of the organization to say, okay, what opportunities exist within your region, even national opportunities. For example, Clay has sent all of his leaders, the senior leadership, to the management internship program because that gives you broad skills across the industry. So we work with everybody to encourage them to find ways. But this is a long-term process. And I think that cannot be emphasized enough because if you're developing, say, for Clay's job, that's going to take 3, 4, 5 years for people because they've got their day jobs. People have their day jobs as well, right?
Yeah, I love that 70-20-10 thing. That puts a nice number on it to at least give yourself a guideline. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is the culture that co-ops have had is that they're almost always the best game in town in terms of where you can work. And the people who join co-ops who get employed tend to never leave, or that used to be the dynamic. That's changing. And I wanted to get a sense from both of you about why it's changing and how you put the emphasis on retention in a way that we really haven't had to do in the past. Clay, you want to start with that?
Yeah, I find that kind of an interesting question because being in that small community and being out in a rural area, there's a lot of great people out here. And you have some great kids, they go off to school and they really aren't interested in coming back to that small town. They're looking for greater opportunities. So we have to be very conscientious of any talent that is willing to come home or anybody that's around in that area. So we keep track of a lot of those. As Delaine was saying, a lot of times the opportunities start at the bottom of the organization and not necessarily at the top. And so then if you start a lot of folks at the bottom of the organization and being a small organization, you don't necessarily always have a lot of movement. So you're going to have to come up with something in order to do that retention. And that's training, giving people leadership responsibilities and opportunities to grow, provide that additional education for them to do that. So retention is how do I keep people really interested in their job, but also employees are looking for flexibility. Younger employees want flexibility in their workplace. And so while we're pretty nimble that we allow flex time, we like to do a lot of things to try to make it so that you enjoy your job here at Wellsboro Electric. So I'm not really losing a lot of people to other cooperatives. I have a hard time getting access to good talent that wants to live in the area.
I think that what you said is true. Co-ops were the best game in town and in some cases still are. But what's happening is national organizations are coming into those same towns and they're saying, hey, you can work remotely. And at first I thought, okay, the IT folks I understood when the co-ops were losing those, the engineers I somewhat, but it even reaches down into billing clerks and things like that. So really, you have to convince people that you are an employer of choice. And part of what is going to convince them that you're an employer of choice is all the things that Clay mentioned. Because we know that employees want competitive pay, they want flexibility, as Clay mentioned, a positive culture, which he also mentioned. But here's where succession planning fits. They also want growth and development. And growth and development is usually in the top 5 list, according to any studies that you read on attraction and retention. And I think, too, Clay's point about small co-ops, not a lot of room to grow, I think we have to change that idea that the only way to grow is up. So I think that you can also, in addition to upward promotions, you can have lateral moves that could ultimately help the employee be a better leader as they gain experience in various aspects of the business.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Clay, when you bring new people on, you've had this succession planning program in place for a while. Is that something that you emphasize to them first thing, that when you're in orientation, you're explaining to them how this works and how they might fit into it?
Yeah, I think that's pretty critical to have an orientation. We try to make sure we provide enough orientation, and it's not done just by senior manager or by myself. We have it broken down into a whole bunch of segments that goes all the way across the organization. So you get lots of employees all involved on letting the new employee know what is it that they do, how do they work in place, what is expected. And so we try to explain to them, what does it mean to be a recce? And so this is what a recce is. Most people, when they first get the job, their radar is up, their antennas are up, they're listening to everything you say, they're willing to do whatever it takes because they're excited to be there and they want to be successful. And so that is the best time, that old thing you say, it's only, you get one chance to make that first impression. And so you have to be able to show that it is a great place to work. It is very flexible in nature, as long as you're not trying to abuse anything. I mean, we're not going to give it away, but it's also can be very rewarding, but it's not necessarily going to be the place that you're going to get hired on. And 3 years from now, you're going to be a senior manager.
So, Delaine, do you have a sense of where co-ops and CEOs might go wrong in terms of either not succession planning or not doing it in a way that fits the need at the moment? Are there pitfalls that you can point out that senior leaders could avoid in this whole process?
I think not being true to the process and not giving the process enough time. It also has to be funded, because in all honesty, and I mean, if I could count the number of times people have said to me, ooh, flavor of the month, I would be a rich woman. I think once you commit to it, you have to see it through, because if people don't see things happening for them, if people don't see people moving up, if people are gaining the skills and yet there is an opportunity, then that's going to probably severely impact the success of your succession plan.
What about you, Clay?
Yeah, I would say if there's anything I wish I could have done would be to start way earlier. I'm very fortunate I've had a board that has been very willing to fund these ideas because it does take money. But I kind of look at it here. So we started down the succession plan. You start dealing with leadership in your senior management. I've created another group, what we call our little leadership group, which is really mid-managers. That, by the way, is using those same criteria that we were fortunate that Delaine got out of our board saying these are the things that they're looking for. So we're able to emphasize there's a reason why you should be looking at those. And, somewhere along the line in our particular case, and I'm not going to say for everybody, it kind of leaves the realm of looking strictly as a succession plan as it starts turning into a cultural business plan. This is how we do business, but it's still constantly trying to move people up through it. So it's still achieving all of the things that a succession plan is there to do. And in the end, I believe it becomes a way of your business.
I just wanted to add another point to Clay's. If you're going to do a succession plan 6 months before, it's not going to work because that's not enough time. And when I go into co-ops, I ask the leaders, what would have helped you when you assumed your position? And they often say, having the knowledge and learning the skills of the position before they assume the role, rather than learning as they go, in addition to trying to learn the actual job.
Where are you seeing this trend going in terms of the need to replace leadership and the need to have a policy in place to grow it from within? Do you see this becoming more acute as the market develops and as co-ops continue into the future? Is it something that's not going away anytime soon?
I don't think it is going away anytime soon. And I think that the numbers support that. It's interesting because I've worked with some co-ops where, okay, the CEO is going to retire in 3 to 5 years, but then so's the CFO, the COO, the VP of this. And so they're really not left with much bench strength. So they have to go actually reach deeper into the organization and start sooner in order to develop these people. And I don't think it's just a co-op thing. I mean, we know that labor force participation rates are down. Retirements are slightly up. I looked at the broadband industry lately, and that was true for them as well. So I am seeing more of an interest in this topic and more of an interest, especially on boards. Boards want to make sure that they have choices when they're choosing their next CEO. And oftentimes in more rural locations, it really is helpful to develop that internal talent, even if you do a broader search.
Well, I think you're right. I think this is going to be something that we come back to a lot. It's refreshing to talk to a leader of a very small co-op that is doing just amazing things that everybody in the program can learn from. So, Clay, have you set a date yet? Are you already on the glide path?
June 30th this year.
June 30th. Oh, yep. Man. Wow. Congrats, Clay. I want to thank you both for being on. The insights have been fantastic, and I know the program is just starved for good information like this. So thanks for coming and sharing your insights.
Absolutely. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Scott. Really appreciate it.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and to our sponsor, Power and Tell. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us at electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Claudia Raffet from Sussex Rural Electric Cooperative in Sussex, New Jersey. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.